I done been through it all, man. Wars in my head, thinking that I'm better dead. I get panic attacks every time I'm asleep. I've been waking up screaming and covered in sweat. Anxiety's killing me, made me depressed. But it's one thing I look at as something to test me, to see if I wanted to see how I'll get it. So I'm never sweating the days I don't rest, which is every night I've been working. Every night I've been...
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Full Spectrum Veteran. So today, Mike, how do you feel about going and taking it way back?
I'd
And
love to.
talking about how it all began for you.
Yeah, I'd love to. Absolutely. I mean, where does it start for everybody? Usually junior high, high school, whether it's peer pressure or, you at some point are going to try, they want to call it the gateway drug, which is a lie. It never led me to want to do harder drugs. I chose to do and try what I wanted to try when I was younger. But the moment I tried cannabis, I knew it was special. It was for me. Um, in so many ways. So I knew it was something that wasn't just euphoric. I knew
Right.
it did something to me physically as well, mentally. So first time I ever tried it was in seventh grade, my first day of junior high, believe it or not.
Crazy.
Uh,
Because
this
you were
was
what,
19,
13 or so?
yeah, it
12?
was like 1979. I was about 12 actually, because I was on the younger cusp of graduating, so I was 17 when I graduated. So I was always in the younger group because of November, you know. But yeah, seventh grade, first day of school, bunch of kids. I grew up in the projects, so we already knew what weed and cocaine and acid and mescaline. That was all big in the '70s. You don't hear that stuff now. Quaaludes. You don't hear about that stuff now. But when I was young, it was popular, all of it. But cannabis was probably as popular behind the scenes then as it is now in the front lines.
Hmm.
Everybody smoked. Everybody smoked. Everybody got it, but it just the availability was nothing like today. I mean, I've been waiting 30 plus years for what we're experiencing right now, with the medical and the recreational and soon to be federally declassified cannabis. It's amazing where we are, but it's taken a long time. And the back in those days, you had no idea what strain, what was it, a sativa, was it an indica?
Hmm.
Hybrids weren't around at the time. It was very rare. Um, it wasn't until I went to Amsterdam, and actually I had a friend who used to write an article for High Times. He actually was a skateboarder as well, and reached out to another friend and got us judges passes before it was. Nowadays anybody can be a judge. When you go to the High Times, you pay and then you get to get samples and all that stuff. Back then you had to know people. You still paid, but you had to know people because it was a very limited number of tickets.
Hmm.
I think it was like 94, 95 area. And that was the first time I was ever introduced to strains, to what sativa is, what indica is, what the differences are, how it's grown hydroponically outdoors. I learned a wealth of knowledge in Amsterdam. Amsterdam is truly a hub if you ever want to experience, learn without judgment, without stigma. It's a great city. I mean, it, it, speak about not being judged. I mean, I've seen things in Amsterdam, and I'm sure you have, Jeff. You've been there as well.
Hmm.
That it's just one. It's the Vegas of Europe. What you see just stays there.
I had I had so much fun over there, but different for me 'cause since I was active duty military still at the time. Um, I mean, I had a whole lot of fun there, but obviously I tried to be good, so I
Yeah, I
didn't
mean,
I didn't try nothing while I was over there. But yeah, I mean, I got out and
I was
it
a
was
civilian when I was there, so
yeah. I intend to go back as a civilian for sure. The wife wants to travel, so Probably having that as one of the first places that we go back to, because I'll be able to now experience Amsterdam in a whole new outlook. Before the
I
Heineken was what I had to look forward to there, and
yeah,
now I have a whole lot of other factories that I can tour instead of the Heineken factory. So
the World Sex Museum is in Amsterdam.
I did go. Yep,
Yeah.
I went there.
They're
Uh,
it,
that was very interesting.
I will say the Cannabis Cup was a blast, but it's in the middle of it used to be in the middle of the winter, the fall actually, where Queen's Day was much more fun. I don't know if you've ever been to Amsterdam and Queen's Day, but that's in the spring, I believe. And it
Okay.
is you have no idea where these people come from because I've been there in November and then showing up at Queen's Day, which I think is in April, maybe.
I'm checking right now.
Thank you, fact checker.
Yeah, end of April.
Yeah, so it's much more the weather's much more advantageous when you're there. People come out of the woodworks. As you know, everybody rides bicycles there, so you literally will get run over. But I do remember one of my favorite parts of Amsterdam. It was not the first time I've ever tried them, but also the first time I ever learned about psilocybin mushrooms as well.
Okay.
They actually had, when I was there, was when the first two psilocybin coffee shops opened. One was called Conscious Dreams. And if anybody's out there who's as old as me and y'all been to Amsterdam and you remember this Conscious Dreams, please share because our stories are pretty epic just from the 2 days we were there. Um, I learned the different forms of psilocybin. We learned from depending on where they were from. Now, I mean, it took me a minute, being a sarcastic Bostonian at the time when I was there, it took me a minute to try to absorb how this guy's kicking all the science to me on something that grows wildly under cow shit, right? I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, so Mexican cow shit is better than Himalayan cow shit. Like, I don't get it. But it is what it is, and we did try it, and we microdosed. Was the first time also I learned how to microdose. Not in the deep form where I grounded it up and put it in capsules in any form like that, but we
Right.
took small caps and we would chop them up and put them, put it in something and eat it or whatever, brownies or whatever, um, and they were amazing. They were amazing. They to this day, and it's been a while since I've done psilocybins, but to this day, they were the cleanest mushrooms I've ever had, and the trips were absolutely, I mean, epic. I mean, I had a phenomenal time that whole day and evening microdosing and smoking throughout the course. We were like I said, we were judges, so we did the big after parties, and we went to the Milky Way for that, and I microdosed straight through that. May have dosed, not micro, at that point,
Yeah.
but it was a learning experience for us. We actually learned that you just don't smoke it, and you just don't, there is science to it, and each aspect of it changes the way you feel and alters a mood in a different way, helps you sleep. And that was the first time I ever learned that. Then from there, I immediately became a member of Normal and tried to push the advocacy of it because I did believe in the medicinal aspect, and I did feel it, and I knew um, no matter what people told me, we've been lied to so much in our lives by our government, by whoever it may be, doctors, teachers, you know what I mean, telling us what they believe, history books. We know they're all bullshit, so
And
so much of that
did
it
you
has
want
made me skeptical.
to did you want to become an advocate? Did you want to join Normal and everything because of the time you were in Amsterdam? Like, did that basically so that opened your eyes more to like the true medicinal benefits, where that kind of confirmed your theories that you already had? Is that kind of what you're
Absolutely.
saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It categorized everything for me. it made me realize, and people there took it as a medicine. They knew. I'll tell you one of the best stories that I can take from that week in Amsterdam. We as Americans, we're very rambunctious. We do things in excess, and we're running around. So at the time, me and my friends that were there, we looked like Metallica as it was anyway. Pierced up, tattoos, long hair, leather. We obviously bikers, and we got there and we found this little place called Lucky Mother's, which was a really cool coffee shop, and it had a spiral staircase that took you downstairs. Upstairs was the dispensary, and downstairs you went to the spiral staircase, and it looked like the inside of I Dream a Genie's bottle. I don't know if you remember the show I Dream
Yeah,
a Genie, because that's throwing it way back, right? But
yeah.
Barbara Eden, I Dream a Genie, and the inside looked like it was round, and it had looked just like the inside of the bottle with the silk and all that. And
Huh.
you would grab your cannabis or your hash, and you would grab your apparatus from upstairs and go downstairs, and they had the big table in the middle, and everybody sat around. Well, we got down there and we sat down, and as we sat down, we put everybody's got their stuff, and we put our stuff down. We're getting ready to roll, and I look up, and there's people from all over. It literally was the United Nations of cannabis. We had several people from China, Spain, Portugal, Russia, Africa, South Africa. It was amazing. There was about 12 people around the table, and then there was us three goofy Americans, obviously rolling two Lion of Judah papers, sticking them together and trying to roll this giant Cheech and Chong joint because they were giving us so much samples.
Mm.
Between three of us, we just couldn't smoke it all. So we were taking cannabis and hash and rolling these enormous joints and just trying to share it with people. And I don't think that the people around the table realized before we lit it that we were going to share it with everybody. So one of the Russian guys looks at the other guys and looks back, and they look over us and they're like, "You Americans have to do everything big, huh?" You know, and it was funny, but at that moment, we pulled it out, we lit it, we passed it around, and it went for 2 hours straight. And I mean, we barely burned half of it at 2 hours. And it again touches upon something we briefly talked about in the last show, or the second to last show. The camaraderie of the cannabis world, where it doesn't make a difference what you look like, what color you are, who you are, disabilities, military, non-military. It's just
Yep.
the bond immediately is insane. Um, and we just had an epic time. These people were from other countries. We struggled to communicate, but we figured it out, and that really made it another reason that I wanted to advocate for it. I knew the medicinal aspect. I didn't care what other people said. I don't care about the commercial with the eggs and none of that stuff. I, I,
Yeah.
kn- I knew what it did to my body, and I knew what it did to my mind, and I know what it does to my soul. You know what I mean? And it works. Um, and this is obviously all after the Marine Corps. I smoked prior. I smoked through junior high and high school. Played sports straight through. Still smoked. I was still a stoner. I hung out on both sides of the tracks. I didn't care.
Yep.
When I joined the Marine Corps, obviously I stopped. I may or may have not participated some while in the Marine Corps, but who knows? And then later after that is when I eventually got back to it, just through a friend, um, casually, who was a smoker, and that put me right back on the pace again to um, do more about it, to try to it again. It was very difficult to get. There were really only two types of cannabis you could get back then. Occasionally you could still get hash, which was smuggled in or made, processed by somebody, but really back then it was a matter of the hydro or the crippy, which was the higher quality cannabis, which you paid out of your ass for.
Hmm.
um, or if you couldn't afford that, it was the dirt weed. It was the Mexican block weed that they'd smuggle over, that was cheap. That was a couple $100 a pound or whatever it was back in the day, where the hydro or the crippy was 3, 4,000 a pound, you know. Um, And that was really our only choices. So if you had the money, you could splurge, but again, you didn't know if you were getting sativa or indica, so you didn't know how to medicate with it. But at the same time, you were getting the euphoric part, and you were getting the physical out of it.
Could you even like back then, you know, because obviously it's nothing like it is now. Could you even make requests for like effects? Because obviously, like even if you couldn't necessarily say indica, sativa, things like that necessarily, like you could be like, hey, do you have anything that's gonna knock me out, or do you have anything that's gonna give me some zip or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, could you make requests like that with this shit that you wanted to get, or is it just you got whatever whatever they
not
had on
until
hand?
not until I entered into the capitalistic avenue of cannabis, which was 100% illegal back then.
Mm.
Um, Not until I got more involved in that aspect and began to purchase it and distribute it. And I started doing it just to buy so I had something to smoke, where I would smoke for free and I would be able to get it to my friends who smoked. And it started really small in that aspect. I did meet through some people. I started to meet growers, Vermont growers, guys that were three, four, five generations growing cannabis since the 60s, since the 50s, some guys. Which just through word of mouth, through people that knew that, I was a solid person, they would sell to me. That's when I started to learn from the grower, um, what he was growing, the strain he would be growing, what it did for us. And then I could educate my customers on that as well. Hey, they're growing um, the skunk. Skunk was huge back then. White rhino, skunk, those were real popular until they started becoming cross genetic. They started making different forms of skunk, and then sour diesel was big back then as well. That was an early one. Um, in regards to these growers, these hydroponic growers, or these guys that were growing indoor and outdoor up in New Hampshire, Vermont areas. And this is, keep in mind, this is in the early '90s, late '80s. These guys have been doing it since the '60s.
Hmm.
Um, so that, yeah, to answer your question, that's when I really got to learn that a lot. Um, but things, like I said, I just started to get involved. It wasn't a full-time job. It was just something I did on the side to have cannabis. And through some really odd things that happened, the guy I was getting it from had to leave town and ended up giving me his connection. And at the time I had met his connection, that guy had run into some very bad people who ran Boston at the time and kind of was shaking him down and told him that if he didn't pay, he's got to go or they'll kill him. So the small guys like us, we just kind of got referred up the chain, and I ended up going from paying $1,000 a pound for good cannabis to $300 a pound if I would take 10 or 20 at a time, which I had no idea what I was going to do with at the time because I had never needed that much. I didn't know that I knew enough people that would smoke, but one thing led to another, and I began selling hundreds of pounds within a time frame of 8 months. I went from buying 1 to 3 pounds to selling 2 to 300 pounds a week. Um, so it got out of hand.
And you
It
never
was
intended any of that, obviously, right? Like
no,
initially, you didn't intend for any of that. You weren't looking for that, or you know.
No, the whole aspect was just to have an easier way to get cannabis for me, my friends, and in a safer way where they don't have to worry about going to somebody's CD and buying it. I would buy it in bulk and I would distribute it amongst guys that were all professionals. We all
Sure.
had jobs, we all had companies, and we just we would, buy a pound each and keep it, and what I'd sell would cover my pound, but like I've always been an entrepreneur. I've been hustling since I was a little kid, you know. And when you see how much money you can make, sure, that definitely affected me. And growing up where I grew up, and seeing so many people impoverished in the projects and who have gone through so much. You want to get out. You want to make sure that you could take care of your family and all those things. And the glitter of what you can make in illegal cannabis, well, it's still to this day is extremely prosperous, right? So, like I said, we within 8 months, I was turning 200 to 300 pounds at a time. I had even got flown to Miami during the drought, bought from some people I knew down in Miami, vacuum sealed it, wrapped it in coffee, put it in my luggage, flew back to Logan, literally going to pick up my luggage at the carousel, and there's three state troopers standing there, right next to the carousel. And I had to have that debate with myself, right? At that point, like, is this worth it? What am I doing? Like, have you watched too much TV?
Hmm.
And then I thought to myself, well, these guys aren't waiting for me, because if they knew that those bags were full of cannabis, they wouldn't be standing there, uh, you know, letting me know they're there. They would have bundled me once I picked up those packages. So I confidently went over and grabbed them. And I think at that point, getting away with that and the confidence it built in me that, it's just marijuana. Nothing's going to happen. You know what I mean? I'm just doing my thing. And, uh, it got crazy. Um, Not to get too deep into some of the what transpired. I had an attempted robbery on one of my townhomes. Eventually, they did rob us at gunpoint. We had a shootout. It led to a lot of crazy things. Eventually, that mess, which I avoided, kind of tripped off the investigations what followed. And as they were in the works, I had moved to Florida to get away from the madness. I never again got into the cannabis industry at that time to be a gangster. I never got into the industry to be, the kingpin. It just, the greed in the aspect of thinking that it's just marijuana and it is what it is. I'm not doing anything wrong. And the amount of money that it was producing in those short 8 months, just, it got away from me. But it got real with the shootouts, with all of these things. It got real. So I packed up everything. I moved to Florida. I bailed. And one night I got a knock at my door at 3 in the morning. Went to go answer the door, and there were about 7 red dots on my forehead, about six on my chest. And they told me to kneel down, and it was the DEA, ATF, um, state police, everybody. And I ended up, through a plea agreement, getting 3 years in federal prison. Um, it was conspiracy. They had nothing more than a few brief phone calls with a good friend of mine, but nothing, no evidence. It was all conspiracy based on testimonies of people that were selling to me, buying from me, involved with me, kids I grew up with that I don't blame them. Why would they throw their life away? It is what it is. Um,
Hmm.
so I ended up getting 3 years in federal prison for it was conspiracy, but they made me plea with the plea agreement. They wanted to give me 10 years. But with the plea agreement, I took three, and 4 years probation to follow. So, uh,
All marijuana, cannabis charges, not gun charges and things like that. Just
none,
strictly cannabis
all.
charges.
So it was conspiracy in the indictment, but when I took the plea agreement, part of the plea agreement was I would get no additional time to plea out to distribution with the intent, I mean, possession with the intent to distribute.
Hmm.
Basically meaning that they get a feather in their hat for catching a dealer, not
Right.
somebody
Yeah.
who a bunch of people said was a dealer, right? So that's really, and they have an unlimited legal budget in the federal system. I believe their trial conviction rate is 97% at the time. So it comes down to, if you don't have a rock solid trial, you better not take the federal government to trial. And at that time, I was guilty. I sold it. I did it. It was, there was no lying. It was time to take my lumps. You know what
And
I
this
mean? And
and this all happened in all of this part. This all happened in Florida, right? So they didn't bring you
yes,
back to the Boston area. It was all
they
handled
did.
in Florida, or
No, I was arrested by DEA ATF. I was brought to Miami Federal Detention Center. Excuse me. This was all in 1998. It was in 98, I believe. And so I went to the Federal Detention Center, basically held there until hearing. Had the hearing. I waived extradition and went to get extradited back to Boston. An experience I'll never forget. I flew on the infamous Conair. Was brought to Opelika Airport in Miami, where shackled ankles, feet shackled together, bulletproof vests, loaded into a gutted 747 that just had like those chairs we sat in middle school and elementary school, those
yeah,
ceramic chairs that were basically bolted to the floor with shackle holders. Women in the front, men in the back, all federal now. Keep in mind, this is all federal.
right.
Um, Now, keep in mind, I'm in Miami, only going to Boston. Did not get to Boston on that Conair flight for a month. Went from there to Oklahoma City via about 4 stops in between Tampa Airport, Texas, Oklahoma was my final stop. Stayed in Oklahoma City for about 3 weeks. Um, Oklahoma City, I met a lot of unique people.
What was the reason
Lot
for
of
so many stops? Well, like just because they had
just
other
how the
people to offload?
just how the routes work. When the
Oh,
day
okay.
ends, they drop you where you are.
So they weren't
Um,
all going to Boston too. The people on the plane, they were going to all across the states, basically.
Ironically, I was the only one going to Boston, full boat. So it just is a matter of when the next route comes up to get me a little closer.
Hmm.
Then they drop me in another prison. I stay there for a couple of days, drop me in another prison a little closer. But I did most of the time in Oklahoma City because that is the Conair hub. That's
Oh, okay.
that is where their main facility is. It's the Marshalls, basically. It's their Marshalls air facility. Um, so I eventually flew out of there, landed in Manchester, New Hampshire. They picked me up there, brought me directly to the federal courthouse in the Seaport in Boston. And then from there, after I was heard, I was brought to Plymouth. Plymouth is a county facility that houses federal, state, and county all together while pending trial or things like that.
Mass or New Hampshire?
Massachusetts,
Okay.
Massachusetts. It's a you can't count the bank robbers. It's Boston. It's
Yep.
Plymouth. Plymouth is where everybody's on their way to either federal or state bank robbery charges.
Hmm.
Charlestown, Southie guys, it's Mattapan guys. It's it was a place where I knew everybody. It wasn't scary. You know what I mean? It was Miami. You really were just held with a bunch of other organized criminals. Federal government really, when you are arrested for cannabis or drug charges in the federal government, it's mostly organized level. The small people, the small dealers, the small peddlers, or the users, those people are county jail or maybe state jail. Federal is the organized, the weight. My They charged me and mine eventually with 4,800 pounds of marijuana. So was it all at once? Of course it wasn't, but that was the overall weight. So it becomes an organized issue. Um,
And how'd they
so
get those numbers? That was just
evidentiary
when.
hearings where people say, "Oh, I think I bought so much from him. Another guy I
Oh,
sold
okay.
so much to him." They try to do the math.
Gotcha. So that was just some bogus number that they made up based off the testimonies that they had.
About as bogus as when they give you the street values on 60 Minutes or one of those news when they're like
Right.
$10 million in crack, right? Like it's like no,
Right.
that's not 10 million street value. That's like 10 million to the guy in Beverly Hills buying it.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So yeah, so I went eventually landed in Atlanta Penitentiary. then to Manchester, went to Manchester, Plymouth. Um, I got to bond out. I got to bond out briefly. Um, Went home for a short period of time, got my affairs in order, came back, was sentenced, and got my 3 year sentence. That was all part of the plea, which was great. So I got to get some of my affairs in order, not much, but then
How long
I
were you out
eventually,
for?
uh, maybe 6 months, somewhere in like that. It was a good period of time. Um, because we had not finalized the plea agreement or any of that. Once we filed the plea agreement, it was I had to set a sentencing date immediately to come in.
Gotcha.
So once we agreed to the plea, it's time. And so I ended up pleading, going back into Plymouth, and then back on Con Air again, back to Oklahoma City, and then eventually back to Atlanta Penitentiary, where I spent about a month in Atlanta Penitentiary. Um, Wild place, just like you see in the movies. Multiple tears, guys with 15 teardrops running down their face, members of every gang, every anti-Semitic group you can think of. Um, real bad place. It's a level 4 penitentiary in the federal system. Then from there, I was sent to Estill, South Carolina. Ironically, just down the road from Paris Island, South Carolina. Um, I could tell when I got there. I could smell that low country the moment I got there, and it gave me the flashbacks of PI. Um, so got to Estill, started in the medium briefly, and went down to the low, which was awesome. They didn't even have a fence, which was amazing. We had softball teams, we had tournaments, we had weightlifting piles. I mean, you could get anything you wanted. Cuban cigars. I mean, at night people were smuggling things in, and I mean, it was a free for all. It was just like people heard what Club fed. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
Eglin is up here where I am now. Eglin used to be the crown jewel of federal prisons when I was in. Everybody wanted to go to Eglin. No fences, great meals. They had a golf course at one time. You know, Morgantown, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, West Virginia is another crown jewel of the federal prisons, where all the governors and Wall Street guys it's where they all go. When they do
So
some.
why'd they have you in South Carolina though? That's just
I
where you
stayed in the
ended up at
Southern
one point?
District. Well, I asked to stay in the Southern District because my family were all still in Florida at the time. We had all moved down here
Oh,
at the
okay.
time. So I requested Southern District rather than the Northern District for obvious reasons, my family and the weather and such. Um, and we were hoping to end up in Florida, which never happened.
Hmm.
So I was in South Carolina, stayed in South Carolina briefly, and then I was offered the federal drug program because of my charges and because I do use cannabis. They felt that I was a great candidate. Usually, you can get up to a year off once you complete the 500-hour drug program, but I did not have enough time to accumulate a whole year off, but I still did it because they transferred me to Talladega, Alabama, which was a real nice facility. It was fenced in, but it had a lot more programs. There were veteran programs there as well to help other veterans, or to basically to I guess you would call it marketing back then, amongst each other, to help each other with anything we could, or help family at home. That there was no veteran dorm at that time.
Hmm.
There are now. I don't know if a lot of people know how many veterans are incarcerated, but there's a shit ton, an absolute shit ton. Maybe guys dealing with PTSD the wrong way, find alcohol, find opioids, make mistakes. Um, you know, Guns are a natural presence amongst veterans. They're something that they rely on, they count on, and sometimes guys make mistakes. Guys pull guns, shoot them in the air, do whatever happens, and they get incarcerated. They end up for some shitty reason getting locked up because of the way they handled their demons or whatever. And it's becoming an epidemic. There's a lot of veterans. Now, there are some that are in there that belong there, that have gone the path of crime
Sure.
as
I
a
mean, just because
lifetime.
you're a veteran doesn't mean you can't still be a piece of shit person. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you're not excused just because you're a veteran. So
Drug addiction is
yeah, some
huge
people need to
amongst
be there.
veterans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the majority of incarcerated veterans are in there for battling alcohol or drug addiction, where it's led them to crime,
Yeah.
or homelessness, which has led them to crime,
Right.
and things like that. And it's sad, but slowly but surely, VFWs and DAV and the Legions are doing stuff for their local prisons. I live in the Panhandle now, and there's a prison in every county just about in the Panhandle. So a lot of these local Legions and DAVs and VFWs are doing a lot to create veterans dorms. But there's a lot of politics in prison. There's a lot of politics on the ground, on the criminal level, all the way up, and it just they try to put TVs in vet dorms. People get jealous. There's it just gets shitty. But so I went to Talladega. I witnessed 9/11 there, which was insane. I'll never forget that. I left class, walked out onto the compound, and the compound was eerie. Not a soul on the compound. Um, I thought people were abducted by aliens. I mean, there weren't even guards.
Hmm.
Nobody. I just slowly walked back to my dorm. We were allowed, because we were in classes there, we were allowed to be in cubicles, two-man cubicles, which was really nice to get out of cells,
Hmm.
and get out of that living for a couple of years. So I had walked into the dorm, and everybody was in the TV room, and they had told me what happened, and it was just the first tower only. Um, and then I witnessed the second tower right live at that time. And I'll never forget that. I can say another thing I will say about Talladega and that drug class. The gentleman who taught us our drug class was from Alabama. He was an African American gentleman from Alabama. He was a retired Ranger. Um, and Ranger went on to be an officer, went through the warrant school, and went from enlisted through. Um, and he said something to me, and I'll never forget. Because like I said, I always teeted on criminal activity as a young guy. Never did anything to hurt anybody or like that, but always hustling. Whatever I could get my hands on and such. So when he told me this, it I felt it. It hit me hard, and I'll never forget it because I changed my life that day. He told me, and he said to me, he said, "You know how smart you are and how intelligent you were with your business aspect, how you did your things illegally." He goes, "Just imagine if you had applied yourself with all of those attributes you had to your illegal businesses, to a legal business. You'd be a millionaire right now." And when he said that, it like I felt that. You know what I mean? Like I felt that because he was so dead on right. Um, and at that point, I knew that I was going to use my entrepreneurial skills and do things with it to benefit, but I also knew that I wanted to help other people, because we were slowly doing some veteran advocacy in the federal prison because there wasn't much around then. Um, so I did that. I got out, did 4 years on federal probation, which was really nothing. I probably could have smoked if I wanted to go back to smoking because they stopped drug testing me the first year, and I was a model citizen. I was a model inmate. I was a model. I made $150,000 the first year I got out. Went back to work at Harley and sold my ass off. Just used everything that guy told me that day. Just that
Hmm.
motivation. And it drove me. It really did. And I never looked back then. Um, and I will touch upon another issue that hit me later on because of this federal sentence, only because I want to tell you more about the veteran advocacy, and then I'll tell you more about the cannabis aspect again. But
Yeah, go for it.
um, because I had this felony in my past, and because Florida is so far behind with restoration of civil rights with crimes that have no violence or no weapons. They were 4 years behind on restoring my rights. I had run into an issue with a financial crime that would have not given me any time. Basically, to withdrew under $10,000 of my own money from my business account twice, which is called structuring. And I got in trouble for that. And they came to my house, and an ex-girlfriend had a handgun in the house that was registered, and they charged me with felon in possession of a handgun because I was a felon. The structuring charge would not have merited jail time, but because of the gun charge. So to make a long story short, I was sent to Florida State Prison for 13 months for this, um, which is far worse than federal prison could ever imagine. Even the penitentiary was better than state prisons here in Florida. They're underfunded, understaffed, disgusting shitholes. People are living apart on top of each other and smoking fake marijuana, the spice, and which
Hmm.
is dipped in transmission fluid and things like this. It's a cesspool. There's violence daily. There's strong arm violence. There's stabbings and deaths on a daily basis. Guards abusing people daily. It was a shithole. Um, but there were veterans dorms, something that I had not seen in my time in federal prison. And they were somewhat decent. They had libraries, they taught classes, they taught the 7 habits of a day. I can't remember the name of that. It's a Stephen McCovey book and class. The 7 habits of an effective mind, I believe is what it's called, by Stephen McCovey. They did that course in
The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes, so that was a course they taught in the veterans dorm. They had life courses. There's a lot of guys, believe it or not, that don't know how to get a bank account, don't know how to write a check. Um, and this class was in the veterans dorm, but they tried to offer it to other inmates, in the life courses. There were the thing that I really enjoyed, and I think that we helped. Um, magnify was the part where we were helping the veterans internally with their VA benefits. A lot of guys don't know when they're incarcerated that they can still receive 20% of their VA benefits incarcerated, sent to their canteens. A lot of guys don't know that. A lot of guys, if they don't have wives or siblings, that money they think just goes away, and it doesn't. You get 20%. The rest of the money, I believe, um, is supposed to go to your siblings and wife. If not, I believe it goes into escrow. I'm not 100% sure on that aspect, but I do know that they're eligible for the 20%. So a lot of guys were helping with that.
Yeah, I don't know
Um,
anything
and a,
about that side of it.
Yeah, and a lot of people were helping with appeals and just various things on the legal aspect, and it was good to see they had a library somewhat. It wasn't the greatest library, but everybody who had books sent in would add them to the library. Um, so there was a lot of at least resources and people that helped with the resources in there. They brought in veteran only guards, which I thought was good. They definitely treated us a lot differently.
Yeah.
So I really, and I didn't want to get deeply into that. It's something I'm not proud of, but again, I'm not ashamed of because it was something I did and it happened and it was life and I learned my lesson. But at the same time, I'm now so close to watching this More Act pass where I'm actually going to get expunged for this and have all of it be removed from my, and I'm living to watch this. So, these are grand times, and those were a lot. Those were days a long time ago where advocacy was young. There were only groups like normal, so a lot of us didn't have a lot of education unless we went out and got our own. And that world was was definitely something that I learned a lot. I tell people and they look at me crazy, but I tell them the 3 years I spent in federal prison was one of the most epic times in my life because it changed me. I learned so much. I was on a path. Um, I was on a bad path for so many ways because I
Hmm.
didn't give a fuck. You know what I mean? I really didn't give a fuck at that time in my life, and I was wide open for anything. Who knows? I mean, we did a lot of bad things. Not bad things to people, but we did a lot of shitty things.
Right.
During those times, and I would never want to go through it in that aspect, but it was all walking through the fire to get to the other side. I learned a lot. I became an entrepreneur. I now have two businesses and a full-time position with my friend's dealership because of everything that I learned after that time. The people I met in there, I still have several friends that I met in that time. The gentleman who taught the 500-hour drug course that I was in, the Ranger, all of these people were defining in my life as
Hmm.
a young man, fresh out of the military, no path other than back into the criminal world with my wild friends doing wild shit.
So
Um,
you were still in like you were in your 20s still most of
yeah,
the time this happened?
yeah.
Yeah.
This was the whole 90s basically. I didn't get out until I got out in '02. So from there I went right back to work for Harley and took off from there. Eventually later on started a couple businesses, and now I have a CBD business. I still have my wholesaling business and doing the full time, and everything's been going great. And the advocacy is this is now my way of advocating. If I can reach out to other veterans or civilians or anybody and show them, give them the resources that I didn't have back then,
Right.
point them to the resources, point them to other veterans who are going through those things, who have been incarcerated. Like, don't be ashamed. If there's other veterans out there who've been incarcerated, fuck, don't be ashamed. Talk about it. Reach out to us. Send us an email or a message. We've all been there. We talk about the recent story with Sean Worsley, and him just carrying his own medicinal cannabis, legal
Yep.
medicinal cannabis, and getting locked up in Alabama and finally getting paroled. Like, paroled, you shouldn't even have charged him. There should be no charges. That should be removed from his. This is 2020 now.
Yeah, exactly.
There are conglomerates out there making billions on cannabis right now. How can you incarcerate anybody on them? You know,
Yeah,
that's my biggest argument.
Alabama's like the worst state too. They're the furthest behind uh, out of everybody, and so to just be going through a gas station one evening and getting caught up like that, your entire life changes for and having the internal stigma like that, and to finally fight that to go get your card in the first place, just to end up arrested and in jail in another state.
Bro,
It's
I did crazy shit for marijuana back in the days when we didn't know where to get it. Um, other than the Miami deal, when there was droughts, when there was needs for marijuana or needs to capitalize on the financial aspect of marijuana, I did crazy shit. I um my if my cousin watches this, I won't mention any names, but if my cousin watches this, he'll remember a time he promised to take me to Lawrence, Massachusetts, in the fucking hood to get me 5 pounds of cannabis, which turned out to be about a quarter pound sprinkled on the top of the five, and the rest shit. Where I had to take him back to this said house, um, and go back into this home with various firearms to retrieve our financial investment. Um, what the fuck was I thinking about? What were we thinking about back then? But we didn't give a fuck. It was stupid shit, and you know, it it wasn't a place I wanted to get into when I started to get into the cannabis. I was just trying to get it to people, just trying to get it easier to people and get it to ourselves, and it just I'm be the first one to tell you, I let it get me. I let the greed get me. I let the money. It's a motherfucker. When you got 250,000 dollars in $100 bills and a fucking safe in the hole of your floor where nobody knows. You know what I mean? Like that's serious. Like you don't. It's crazy. And
So back
I
then,
know
back then with where we are now, did you think we'd ever be where we're at now? You
I
know?
knew I knew that eventually cannabis would get legalized because there are so many great advocates out there, Steve D'Angelo's and people out there who continued the fight and continued the medicinal research and the Canada research and the Israelis do so much epic cannabis research. The Jamaicans, there's so much that I knew that it would continue to grow. Did I think I would see it in my time? No. Not in a time where I could enjoy it, you know,
Or be
but
sitting here talking about it right now?
or being able to share about it and share the
Yeah,
experiences and
yeah.
be able to share what we're doing now. It is the cannabis renaissance, like Steve D'Angelo says. It is the renaissance because we are seeing it, we are seeing it become and replace the new dot com. It's the new wave. It's going to be a 30 plus billion-dollar enterprise by 2023. Um, it's it's not just medicinal. We know the capitalistic aspect of it. We know the medicinal aspect of it. And we're learning so much more about it that we had no idea because of the grants and the research opening up, and the companies like um, uh, Canopy, Aurora, who have the money to continue research. And that's great. That's great stuff. So yeah, to answer your question, I knew it would come. I just didn't know that I would be able to reap the benefits and
Yeah.
you know.
All the organizations that exist now, and the research that we're still obviously having a lot of issues with a lot of the research. Most of what they have available for the cannabis that they do the research with comes out of this one place in Mississippi with just garbage weed that isn't going to help anybody's results really. You know what I mean? Because it's like
Now you've got
it's five
yeah.
THC crap. 5% THC garbage basically that isn't going to get them far past their control levels or whatever they have to shoot for when they're doing their tests. So um, they're still bound. Federally, they're still bound from whatever we have access to. They can't technically even go use that to do their testing with. You
The
know.
great thing is in the states that cannabis is recreational, a lot of the universities now are offering different courses,
Hmm.
whether it be in the entrepreneurial level or the grow level or agricultural level, which is really cool. And on top of that brings the research grants, more funding. Um, uh, and I think a lot of those companies, a lot of the successful companies, Lowell Farms, those guys are giving back to the research as well. And that's opening up more doors. Once the decriminalization hits federally, then that opens the doors to everybody, to MIT, breaking it down in a different level to, not just schools that are in Colorado, Washington, California.
Hmm. Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what it what can still be developed. Obviously with everything that we've already seen in the last few years with solvent extractions and stuff like that. Where
CBGs, CBNs
Yeah,
now.
yeah, where we're understanding how to break it all down, how to isolate things. Whether we're using shatter now or crumble or waxes and things like that versus just the flour, the original flour. And being able to extract it. We got presses now where you can press your own rosin even, and so interesting to see how far it's come, and especially from where you would have been back in the 90s, late 80s, but 90s for sure, to see the difference. I mean, imagine what it would have been like if Amsterdam had what we have now back then. It just wasn't in the States. It would have blown your mind, to go over there and find out about shatter, you know what I mean? And
Well, it's like people don't even go. A lot of people don't even have to go to Amsterdam for the Cannabis Cup anymore, because now they have Cannabis Cups in LA and they have
hmm
Cannabis Cups in Denver. They're all over the world now, and it's offered the opportunity now where you can get involved and learn. Now people can still learn the things like I learned. It's timeless. It's timeless because, especially being new and getting involved in the cannabis world, no matter when you get involved, the education of it is all the same. And what a great way to learn, then, being around the High Times Cannabis Cup, or one of those large events. I know we have a cannabis event coming up here in Florida as well, that
yeah,
you're going to as well,
November,
right?
I'll be there. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really honestly know a whole lot about it. It's the Florida Cannabis Festival in Mount Dora, Florida, November 7th, all day. Renninger's Flea Market, I think, is the location where it's actually going to be at. It's a really big area. Um, I've been
These are
up
great
there.
events for people to get to educate yourself
It's
in the
supposed to
cannabis world.
be it's supposed to be pretty big. There's a few other organizations here around Florida that will be there too. That I'm going to try to link up with a couple of them there. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be the first festival that I've actually gone to before. I haven't gone to one or had the opportunity to go to one before, and then now to be involved the way we're involved, um, I'll be even coming at it from a different perspective. I'm gonna try to do some interviews and things like that while I'm there. Definitely gonna try to get some footage. I'll bring my cameras and stuff like that,
Yeah,
and
maybe we could do a remote podcast.
yeah, I can try to like do some live stuff. Definitely, I'll bring my other camera to just shoot some footage for later or whatever. Um,
So these events are like exactly what we're trying to, you know, get across to the veterans or even civilians that are trying to get in to learn cannabis, get to know the knowledge aspect. If you're going to grow, if you want to learn about it for whatever ailments you're dealing with, this is a great entry level way. No frills, no, you're not bound to anything. Go in, talk to people, get to know people. If I can say anything, again, if I can continue to reiterate, the bonding amongst the cannabis community is amazing. Everybody's always willing to help each other. They're always willing to work with each other. They're always willing to share whatever they got with you. And I've seen that happen so many times, so many places,
yeah,
where like you're just not sure and somebody just goes, "Hey." And you're like, "All right." Like a fight about to break out somewhere, you know what I mean? And somebody just starts burning and passing around, and it's just like everybody's like, "Oh, oh, I didn't know." All right,
yep,
So I mean, I can't say that enough about it. Like we're gonna touch so much more upon the medicinal aspect of it and what it does, not only medicinally, but what it does for us mentally and such. Like that's going to be the priority of most of our podcasts, where we bring on a lot of the guests and such. But
sure,
like I like to continually bring back that. And if anybody out there has stories of that camaraderie like these stories, I would love to hear them. If they'd reach out to our full spectrum veteran, um, Facebook or Instagram, wherever you're more comfortable sending us stories. And also, and I'm sorry to keep running on, but I also, any veterans that did time, that feel they're being judged or ashamed about it and want to talk about it, or want to talk to somebody, or want to come on the show and talk about it, want to get it out, and just like, maybe my story helps you. Like, I don't know, but don't ever be ashamed, because it's just a stepping stone to who you become.
yeah,
And you
absolutely,
need you need that fire.
yep. Yeah, definitely hearing other people's stories can kind of let people know they're not alone. Everybody thinks that they're the only person struggling with something, or you know, they don't think they know how to get something off their chest, maybe, or whatever, and then to be able to hear it coming from other people, obviously. Um,
I had a gunny buddy who was a friend of mine. He gunny top, he was a gunny sergeant. He said to me, "Every motherfucker has a skeleton in their closet, and every motherfucker has a demon as well.
yeah.
No matter what it is, you know what I mean? Like eh, Freud believes that trauma at a very early age is something that sticks with us for life, right? It can tends to shape a lot of our decisions, So I mean, I can see it.
hmm Yep. It's so crazy to just think, from you telling the beginning of the story to see how far everything's come now. Um, Now for you, the more act has to pass in order for your expungement because you don't have state charges, you have federal charges, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So federal will be expunged immediately. Those will be the ones with if there are no violence, no weapons or no RICO type of charges, organization charges, then they will begin to expunge. That's what I believe. Again, if there's anybody out there who is far more educated on the MORE Act, we'd love your input.
If
Basically,
they
just what I
Sorry.
yeah
I was going to say, if they go off of what some of the other states have seemed to do so far, like with Colorado, where you petition the court, because it'll give, like what Colorado did, because I was looking into their bill recently for expungement, is the way they wrote it in the bill is that if the crime you committed wouldn't have been illegal on or after the day of when they made it decriminalized, then you can petition the court to have your case removed. So they
right.
wouldn't do like, it didn't sound like there's going to be a group of people like, okay, your job is to find everybody eligible for expungement. It sounds like you would prompt the court to,
Same as civil rights and all of that stuff.
right.
Yeah.
So I would imagine, if it happens federally, uh, it would probably be a petition the court thing, just because that seems to be what the states are doing. But who knows? Maybe at that point they'll be like, all right, just keyword search for everybody's charges and get rid of them if they meet the qualifications. The thing is though, with like Colorado, for example, it depends how they decriminalize or even legalize it because they might still only legalize it up to certain weights. Like in Colorado, I think it was 2 ounces or less. So if your charge was still over 2 ounces, I don't think that you would be able to um, expunge it because it still technically would have been not considered
Right.
legal under the Colorado law. You know what I mean? So I
Right.
guess it really just is going to come down to how they want to do the paperwork, where they want to go to the legalization, because everyone's
I mean, obviously
everyone's going to be
you'd have to
different.
petition it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously you'd have to petition it in some way. So as you file, they can review them and go from there. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited that the whole process is even available and coming to, I mean, as I'm sure so many veterans can understand and feel me. I'd like to have my guns back. you
hmm
know I would like to have my guns back. I have not been able to vote or carry concealed or own a weapon since 1998. So you know in the immortal words of Leonard Skinner, give me back my bullets.
Yeah, a lot of
I'm
people don't.
ready.
A lot of people don't think about that kind of stuff too, like what you lose, the rights that you lose. It's not always just weapons. You don't have one of your basic rights as an American to vote, especially with elections coming up
This
soon.
is the first year. This is the first year as a felon. If you apply and they do the research on your felony, and if it is nonviolent, I believe, and doesn't have sexual crime and all that stuff, they will allow you to vote.
Did you do
I
that?
have a friend that did. Yeah, I had no, I didn't know about it until it was too late to
Oh, okay.
register. I will in 4 years from now if I have to. I'm hoping I don't have to. I'm hoping I will be on the process of expungement or done.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, maybe where I don't have to cross that bridge. But if not, yes, I will.
Nice. Yeah, that'll be good. I remember seeing that on Florida's bill, changing it to not just be a blanket statement for all felons, but if you fell into certain categories, you still lost your right, but if you fell into other categories, then you would get that right back to you. Which it depends how people look at it, like in a situation like yours. Um, you're always still going to have some people that think you're where you're supposed to be because of what you were doing at the time, but and then you're going to have people that don't understand why the hell you wouldn't be able to vote just because you went to prison for something. You know what I mean?
For
And
selling
then
for selling something that is
grown in the ground.
becoming a $1 billion commodity right now.
Yep. Yeah,
But
there's
I mean,
there's the quote going around the internet right now. Is I don't remember the exact quote, but basically there shouldn't be people in prison while there's companies profiting for what those people are in prison for.
exactly.
There shouldn't be able to be somebody in Florida making money while people sit in prison in Alabama when
And
when
let
there's
us plug the Last Prisoner Project, but on that note,
yeah, definitely, absolutely great, a great organization that I'd love to be able to do more on specifically, because
can
that's
we put a link up to as well for them?
yeah, I'll put a link up for Last Prisoner Project.
They're doing epic stuff. Working on getting people out of prison who are still incarcerated for cannabis charges. Helping people get expunged in states where it's allowed. Just advocating for these people and trying to get them out where nobody has ever done this. They've got some big names behind them. Again, Steve D'Angelo, some of the Marleys are involved. This is it's a project that's moving. Belushi it's moving in the right direction, and they're doing really good stuff. Michael Thompson in Michigan has a hearing now in November. He was doing life for cannabis, which is absurd, but now has a parole hearing to get out finally. So, Last Prisoner Project doing great stuff. And if anybody needs any help, they're the people to reach out. And I think Jeff can put up the link once we put this up.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe a couple other related things, similar organizations we can think of. I'll link those along with it, just so you can see. I think an important thing we kind of spoke about, me and Mike together before the show, is that one thing we really intend to do with the show is highlight as many organizations and as many of these coalitions and these projects that we can. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, not only cannabis related, but veteran specific related. Um,
And they're not
and
all veteran related either.
right, no, no,
You
no.
know,
I mean, there's so many organizations just for better rights for cannabis. Period.
yes.
And then kind of every demographic kind of has organizations broken down from there, but of course, kind of with our theme, I follow more along a lot of the veteran communities, and it's been amazing to learn about how many there are, how they're involved, who they're linked to,
And
how,
they're
who.
all positive. They're all super positive, like Elvis's group, Boots to Buds. Like I've been following just, I'm not growing anything right now, so I kind of just read a little bit and move on. And it's just super positive input. And some of the other groups that you've turned me on to recently because of what the podcast has been reaching. Um, just really, really super positive stuff. And I love it. It's like there's so many other veteran groups and organizations out there not affiliated to cannabis that are turn out to be assholes. You know, a lot of
Hmm.
people digging each other, and and maybe not in the times when people need that, and I like these veterans cannabis groups and veteran cannabis advocacy groups, and even the social media groups, because they are so positive, and they are supportive, just good stuff. I haven't seen any negativity whatsoever so far. There might be, but I haven't seen any.
Yeah, yeah. It's been remarkable. People I've been able to talk to. Having Elton on the show was awesome. Uh,
It really
to
was.
to hear about Boots to Buds, and because it's there's people that just don't know that type of stuff even exists. Like who would have thought that there would be a veteran specific growing group? You know what I mean? And then you join that group, no idea what to expect, and find out it's literally nothing but veterans all day long trying to help other veterans out learn how to grow. And that's just one example of hundreds of things that are going on right now. And it's
And then we
just good
learned.
to know everyone that has your back while all this is going on, to one extent or another. We're all trying to help each other out at the end of the day. So
What was great when we got to know the Boots to Buds guys is how we started to learn some subgroups from there, and all of that was just really, it was that whole show, everything was really positive. It was those the 22 and gone guys, those guys.
22 too many.
22 too many. I'm
Yep.
sorry. Those guys, the market, the open market for the veterans, and that's amazing. Like,
Yep.
I'd like to see that as the decriminalization does go through and the states do have the opportunities. I'd love to see that become something of a chain, where they can use that model in other cities, where to do these veterans free markets and stuff. I think it's brilliant, because so many of us need to learn, because once we do have the access to be able to grow legally, we're all going to want to do it. We're all going to want to do it because it's economically the smartest way to go. Plus, it's the best way to knowing what you're getting and what you want to grow and what you want to use for your medicinal purposes.
Right. Yeah. Once you learn, you can grow your medicine in a little cube you built 4 feet by 4 feet by 7 feet, or 6 feet in some cases even. Um, you don't need a ton of fancy stuff. Obviously, the fancier, the better to a certain extent your things are going to be. But at the end of the day, a lot of it's going to come down to nutrients and the type of conditions it was left under. And um, there's obviously a lot of passion. I've learned in that group there's a lot of passion. Sometimes these guys talk about stuff that I didn't even know I'd have to that was a consideration. And you got guys, mixing their own water constantly to get new nutrients in, and changing soils out, and the techniques like flushing when they have to flush all the nutrients. And
How about the
it's just,
strains? I've never heard of half of the strains in that group, and they were amazing. Like, I see the pictures, and I'm like, I've never heard of that.
yeah.
Like, it's epic.
Once it happens here in Florida, I'm definitely ready to check it out for sure.
Same
I
here.
even if it only is like one of those 4x4 tents, and have it in the house or in the garage or something like that. And um, from what I've seen in some of these groups, what people are able to seem to constantly have available and going in a 4x4, like what we learned with Elton the other day, how he had the separate tent just with clones and stuff ready to go. That's in veg state. It's not in a flower state yet because it's on a different light cycle. So once it gets moved in, that's when it starts to flower. And it's just, I never knew that. I never, I don't know. I guess there was no reason to know that, but I didn't realize you could just like hold a plant. You know what I mean? Like hold a plant until it's ready to flower.
Yeah.
So to me that was like probably the coolest part, because I guess anytime that I ever pictured it in my head, I would picture planting a seed, waiting forever for that to grow up, and then God knows how long before it would start to flower or whatever. Like I never realized it's like, oh, let me just pull this plant that's already 2 months into growing, throw it
It's
in
the
here,
fastest
and
process to keeping the cycle consistent.
yeah,
You got the clones, you got the vegetated, and then you got the flower state, and that way you can consistently cycle them,
and
and
it grows
continually
so
yield more.
fast. From what we're seeing, like 3 months to harvest. It looks like in a lot of cases, sometimes even earlier, 8 to 10 weeks sometimes.
I'm seeing
Um,
a lot of people getting 8 to 10 weeks
yeah.
sometimes.
So that kind of stuff like blows my mind because I never would have thought about that prior. Like the only experience I have with remembering anything that has a season and what months it produces, and like I have a pretty nice lemon tree out in my backyard, like a really big one. It when we're in season, which is next month, November and December is like the best 2 months for the tree, and it's crazy the amount of lemons. Like if I had a way to keep them, like it would be more than enough lemons to get me through a whole year, if not like longer. Like I don't even know what to make anymore. When the season comes around, it's just a large tree. But like that was the only experience I ever really cared to know about how flowering works. You know what I mean? But obviously, a lemon tree is not a good example to how cannabis grows because the whole point of cannabis is how quick it grows. That's like the
Yeah.
sustainability of it. Um, but I never understood that the sustainability was uh, you can fully support yourself and probably your entire family off of a 4x4 spot in a room. You know what I mean? So it just I
And the
blew
yields
my
he's getting
mind, and
too.
I love to be able to just bring people on and learn. And like so with you tonight, obviously you had a long history of a story to tell. You know what I mean? So I thought that it would be cool for you to share all that. Um, I know we kind of we talked about stuff in the first episode, but not nearly as in depth, obviously, as today. So, but yeah, your history goes back a long time. Your history goes back when I was in high school. When you got released, the year you got released from prison. You said in Florida is where you finished out.
Yeah, no, Talladega, Alabama, in
Yeah, Alabama.
2002.
Yeah, I graduated high school in 2002. So, we came from a little bit of a different era. Our eras were a little bit different.
I left out about 250 off the wall stories that I probably will segment little bits and pieces through the course of our podcast, but I was trying to keep it somewhat streamlined, I guess,
Yeah.
not straying too far off because how we could go with the stories. I just kind of wanted to share my story. So if there were other, veterans or anybody out there who's been through something similar, they understand that, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's what we did. Everybody makes bad mistakes. Everybody lives and learns, and moves on. And it's you're not judged by your past. You're judged by you now,
Yep.
and your legacy. So, don't be ashamed. And if you want to reach out to anybody, we're always here. And we always keep it real on this podcast. That's one thing we can assure you. So, and we're always willing to talk. That's, to anybody for any reason. Just reach out to us, So
Absolutely. Had a good time tonight.
I did too. I think that was a good one.
Yeah, I hope everybody, enjoys your history, your story, um, taking it way far back, before a lot of people were probably really super engaged in it. So
I hope
it's
it helps
cool.
somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you everybody for tuning in. Please like, share, follow, all that cool stuff for us. Um, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and everything once you're there. We're still trying to learn all this kind of stuff, but we're trying to, be able to still get all this content out to you guys. We want to make sure you see it all. So
Get ready
again,
for some more guests too.
yes, starting again next week. All right. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in tonight, and we will see you next time.
Have a good night.
Later.